Creating conversation. Arrow.net, ARROE.net. We are unplugged and totally uncut with Brad Taylor.
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
How's everything down there in Charleston, sir?
It's not as bad as it is upstate. So
Right.
We didn't get the...
Yeah, I'm up here in Charlotte, and I'm looking out here at this beautiful forest in South Charlotte, and my God, we're still blanketed here.
Are you really?
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, and I'll tell you what's been really fun about this particular snow and ice storm is that the deer have just been so playful. We had a 6-point buck yesterday that was just out there just having the best time of his life.
Wow. Yeah, I was supposed to be in Greenville yesterday, and the snowstorm stopped that.
Absolutely. So now, are you writing in Charleston itself, or do you go to the areas that you write about so that you can, just take it all in that particular moment?
I absolutely travel. When I can get on the ground, boots on the ground, we called sight, sound, smells of the battlefield back in the day. I absolutely travel. For my last book, I went to Taiwan, went to Australia, but for this book, we were locked in. I couldn't travel anywhere. And so I had to use all the travel. Luckily, only about 10% of my travel research actually makes it into a book. And luckily, Apple iPhotos kept all my pictures. And so I had to go back and say, okay, where have you been where you know what the culture's like, and you can use in a book.
Well, I love the way that in this book, End of Days, that Pike and Jennifer are quarantined. You made this such a relatable story compared to what, like the things that you've done in the past.
Yeah, I tell you, that was a hard choice. I was just mentioning my last book. When I finished my research and came home, we then got locked in, and I was forced with a horns of a dilemma. Do I talk about COVID? And in that book, I punted and said, okay, no, I'm going to set it in January 2020, right when the Taiwanese elections are happening, because that's kind of what the book was about anyway. But for this book, we were still locked in, and when I was writing it, I was like, do I just ignore this? I've talked to other writer friends of mine. They're like, I'm not writing about COVID. Screw it. The world is what it is. And I was like, I write about current events, and the problem with current events is they're current. And I thought, do I include COVID? Do I not include COVID? How do I do this? It's not a COVID book. It's just one more thing that the task force has to deal with. They have to deal with the weather. They have to deal with, flight plans. They have to deal with the enemy. And now they had to deal with COVID. And I looked at the data and said, I don't think this thing's going away. And so I put it in.
Well, I love that you did do that because, like I said, it's not only relatable, but it also puts a timestamp. This is one of those things where we can look back at this and go, yeah. And because, that's one thing about your books. They're never going to go away. 25 years from now, we're still going to be reaching for them and read them over and over again.
Yeah, and, some things about COVID, I hate to say it, but they're kind of good for actually real-world operations like I used to do, or writing a thriller. So everybody's got a cell phone now. There's cameras everywhere. If you look at how we caught the Boston bombers, how do we do that? We did it through surveillance footage. They found the pictures and posted them, and people said, oh, I think I know who that guy is, and et cetera. Well, now everybody's dressed like a bank robber.
Yep.
You got a mask on, you put on sunglasses, you put on a hat. None of that stuff will work. So it works out for certain scenes, but other things are bad. Like we can't get in the EU, Pike couldn't travel, and the Israelis could, which is what sparked my idea about the way I started the book.
Being in quarantine, did that mean that you had to double up on your writing time, or because I talked with musicians during quarantine, and they weren't happy people, but authors just have this way of escaping to a completely different world.
Yeah, it wasn't good. People tell me all the time that, it must be great since all you do is write by yourself and write a book. That's not how I write. I don't even have a writing desk. I don't have a writing room. I pack my laptop up and I go wherever I'm going to go. I go to the beach. I go to a park. I go to a library. I go to a bar. And that's how I write. And then all of that's shut down. And so I'm sitting on my couch with my wife saying, you need to go somewhere else.
Well, I know what Charlotte looked like when things were shut down. What did Charleston look like? I can't imagine the Ravenel Bridge without a car going across it.
Yeah, well, initially it was kind of eerie. It was kind of like watching the movie Contagion.
Yep.
So when you go out to the grocery store, there's not a car on the road because Charleston's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, and so there's usually a ton of traffic. And it was kind of like, this is like something out of Soylent Green.
When you go through a real life experience like that, does the writer in you start taking notes instantly, or is it one of those things where you as a U.S. soldier, you start taking notes of the reality of the moment and your awareness is keen to everything?
It's more of the latter. I just kind of take it in and all those things kind of process. There'll be certain times I carry a journal around with me, and I'll see something that happens, and I'll jot a note down and say that, that happened. But it's not that I didn't immediately, like I said, I didn't even want to write about COVID. I was hoping it would be gone, but it wasn't.
Well, look at what you do with the End of Days is the fact that this is an unsanctioned surveillance mission. I love the way that you use that word unsanctioned.
Yeah, the entire task force itself is pretty much unsanctioned. I created the task force out of whole cloth because I didn't want anybody to think that I was writing about units I'd served in, because they're all classified, and just changing the names to protect the innocent. So I knew how that would work. You wouldn't let somebody do that just without any oversight or anything like that. So I built it up out of whole cloth. And then when I started using it, it's pretty much unsanctioned all the way around. But now it's really unsanctioned because Pike and Jennifer and the task force are operating as Israelis.
Do you feel like a general piecing together a mission? Because, in order for you to do a story like this, to keep it away from the reality, you've got to sit there and figure this whole entire thing out like a chess game.
Absolutely. And it's, I get as accurate as I can. On the tactical level, what I like to say is, the gunfight scenes and the technology and all that stuff is absolutely accurate. On the strategic level, that's where I have to create the story arc and say, where's this thing going to go?
One of the things that really catches a reader's attention right off the bat, and I don't know if it's set up for a reason, but you've got a disclaimer right there at the front of the book, which I love. This is a work of fiction. You just flat out say it right there at the start. Yeah,
I get questions all the time about I've done operations all over the world, and people are always asking me, is this part of you've done this before, you've been here before, you've been there before, and actually the answer is, yes, I have been there before, but it was because I was doing book research, not because I was doing any kind of operation.
Do you still have to turn in your books and let the government read them first to find out if you're releasing anything, or are you a free spirit now?
No, every organization has their own pre-publication review process. The CIA has theirs, State Department has theirs, FBI has theirs, and the Department of Defense has theirs. And the Department of Defense pre-publication review guidelines are, if you're going to write about anything that affects national security in a nonfiction sense, if I was going to write a story or a presentation on special operations in Syria, even though I haven't been to Syria, I know how all that worked. That would have to be cleared. If I was going to write my own autobiography, that would have to be cleared. Fiction does not, because where do you draw the line on that? Say I was going to write a story of year 3036 on the planet Neptune about special operations. Does that have to be cleared?
Wow.
So it's very hard to figure out, in fiction, what's the cut line there? Say I was going to write a book about a police detective in New York City. Well, I've never been a police detective in New York City. Does that have to go to pre-publication review from the Department of Defense?
But see, but the reality of your moment, though, is that as readers, we really get into it like it's really happening. I just love the way that you design your words and paragraphs in that direction.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't help but use your own experiences. So, if you're going to write a story about riding a bicycle, what would you do? You think about the last time you rode a bike. So when I'm writing a story about assaulting a house, or the planning process that goes into that, or the strategic nature of what goes on behind the closed doors, at the White House, I can't help but refer back to my, own experiences.
One of the things that I've always loved about your writing is the fact that, and maybe it's just a thing that I did as a kid, but I love that your chapters are sharp and to the point. You don't drag out the chapter and tire out the reader. Yeah,
that's a learning point. When I first started writing, I didn't have, I've never had any writing instruction whatsoever. And I wrote my first book. You get your entire life to write your first book, One Rough Man, and it sold. And I then got a 5-page editorial letter when one of those things was, your chapters are too damn long. I had to learn how to write.
What was that process like to go? Because, learning how to write means you have to get rid of those old habits.
Yeah, well, I didn't have any old habits. That was a good thing. I was going to write, it was just a bucket list thing for me. I always wanted to write a book. And, I thought I'd sit on the bedside table, and my mom would say, that's the best book ever. And that would be the end of it. And it sold. And so then I really delved into the craft of writing. And, my instruction has been authors. I'm a voracious reader. And so I wrote a book that I would want to read. I didn't write a book that I thought would sell. I wrote a book that I thought that I would like to read. And that it did so.
So now, then even all the way through your time with our U.S. forces, you were always that writer? Did you just keep it underneath the mattress? I mean, how did you keep that creative engine going?
Yeah, I did. Well, to be honest with you, a lot of the stuff in the military, so I was in special operations, and when you craft an exercise, those guys are super, super smart. So you've got to build a scenario that they will believe. Oh, wow. And you're basically writing a book. So you're creating a fake bad guy, you're creating a fake scenario, you're going to a real country. You're going to go to Peru, and there's a passport forger there who's helping Al-Qaeda or something like that. You had to create all of the left and right limits of why you're going to do this assault, not do it somewhere else. And that's basically what you do when you write a book, because Pike can do 1,000 things. He's going to do one. Well, now I have to design why he did not do 999 other things.
You're like an architect, because the architect has to answer the question, why did I put the window there? Why didn't I put it over here? Absolutely, because the readers will pick up on that. I'm a reader first before I'm a writer, and you'll pick up on it immediately. You're like, why didn't he just go through the front door? Why is he crawling through the window? So you've got to make a reason. Okay, he's not going through the front door because it's barricaded, or whatever you're going to do. You have to design, why did Pike Logan do this thing? In the real world, somebody be driving down the road, reach for their cell phone, and get in a wreck. Well, if I did that in a book, they'd say, well, that's mighty convenient. So you have to figure out, there's got to be a reason why he got in a wreck. Well, you've got to be the type of writer, then, that puts the perfectionist over in the corner, because my last book took 2.5 years to write, and you're putting out 2 books a year. I was, yeah. I quit that. It's not 2 books a year. You're promoting one book, you're editing a second book, and you're writing a third book. And I still did security contracts. I was still doing book research trips. I was still writing novellas as well. And it about broke me in half. So I was like, no mas, going back to 1 a year. Now, in the book, End of Days, you've got a verse from the book of Revelations. What is the story behind that? Well, the book itself is basically about a guy who wants to start the final crusade, the next crusade. Yeah. He has a vision for the second coming of Christ, and that involves the Temple Mount in Israel, and he wants to start a war, a grand war. And the book of Revelations, the book of Daniel, the book of Ezekiel, those are where the prophecies come from about the second coming. See, and once again, that's the reality of the moment that you bring in there, because there's a lot of preachers that are talking about that temple and everything like that. It's always that golden temple that if it gets in the wrong hands, that could be a signal. Absolutely, and some people, it's a theology called dispensationalism, and some people take it to a greater degree than others. But it's in Christianity. If you're a Christian, you certainly believe it to a certain extent, no matter what. Yep. The Left Behind series from a few years ago was a New York Times best-selling thing. That's dispensationalism, the rapture, all of that stuff. Because you write so much about things that are in the headlines, is there a part of your creative imagination right now that is looking at this Prince Harry story where he's just trying to get British protection? Do you think Pike and Jennifer could offer that protection for him? I haven't thought about that. Because it's just one of those things. It's like it's almost like Pike and Jennifer could be the ones that would raise their hand, saying, "All right, if the UK isn't going to do it, we're going to do everything we need to do and get you the intel that you got to have in order to make sure that you can enjoy your journey there." Yeah, well, the thing is that the task force itself is not a PSD, personal security detail. So he's got enough money to hire his own. Now, when you build the framework of your stories, what comes first? Are you walking down, let's say Market Street in Charleston, and it says, wow, that I feel a threat. Now I've got to build a story that's going to lead to a victory. Usually what happens is I will see a story on the news or something will pick my interest. And I get feeds every day from all over the world that don't make, United States news, but I'll see something and say, okay, that's something I can use. For instance, I had Boko Haram in Ring of Fire, and nobody ever heard of Boko Haram. And when the book came out, right when it came out, they kidnapped all the girls in Nigeria, and now everybody knew about Boko Haram. And everybody said, oh, Brad, suppression. Well, no, they've been lopping heads off since 2009. You just don't hear about it in America. So most of the time, it's a slow burn thing that I see, and I'm like, okay, that's going to go up sooner or later, and I'm going to write about it. I'll give you another example. I had, when I was doing 2 books a year, I had my publisher said, I need your next plot, next title, next everything, right after I finished the book.
and I had nothing. And there was this little-known group nobody had ever heard of called ISIS. And I said, okay, I'm going to write this. Here's what I'm going to do. If somebody goes overseas as an American citizen with a blue passport from America, blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy, he's a threat. He is a definite threat. And so that's the story I built. Well, halfway through the book, ISIS took over Mosul, ran around Iraq. Everybody heard about him, and I was like, oh, no. On the one hand, I was like, well, that's good, for publicity. On the other hand, I thought, we're going to crush those guys. And my whole book was worthless. And then I did some more research and was like, we're not going to crush them. They're going to be around.
Is there a side of you, though, when you do travel to these other countries that once you cross, from that airplane into their land, I mean, it's like, do you feel like you're being watched because people know you globally? They know how you think, they know how you plan things out, and they know your history.
No, actually they don't. I'll give you a funny story. I was in Lesotho, Africa, and that book, Operator Down, was about a coup. And so the Special Forces from Lesotho Defense Forces were going to do the coup. And so I was doing research on that, and I was looking at, television stations, police headquarters, that kind of stuff in Masura. And I got rolled up as a spy.
Ah!
I got interrogated for about 8 hours. They thought I was an American spy. They never Googled my name. If they had Googled my name, I would probably still be there. But at the time, I just said, hey, I'm a tourist. What are you doing?
So in these binge-watching days, do you find yourself getting that little tingle of wanting to write a binge-watching TV series?
A friend of mine, Mark Greene, is a really good writer, and he has the ability to write screenplays. I don't know how to do that.
But see, that's what would be fun about it, because that's binge watching these series and stuff like that is so raw and so new to every one of us.
Yeah, I would say that if anybody's out there listening, you could just take my books and you could make a series.
Now I got to ask you a creative question from a writer to another writer. Pike and Jennifer have been a part of your life for a very long time. I know they give you energy and everything like that, but will there come a time where Brad's got to say, I got to move on?
I have thought about that. I mean, there's a lot of characters in the Task Force series. I've got Knuckles. I've got Aaron and Shoshana are in this book. They're Israeli assassins. I've thought about spin-offs from them. And with the characters I've created, it would probably be the way I went. If I went to a complete standalone with a different character, I think I would just end up writing Pike Logan, except he would have different hair color, different eye color.
Mm-hmm. So do you think people are going to take the book End of Days and let's say they're going to study it? Because you do put things in there that really, for those that are serving on task force, I mean, there's a lot of lessons to be learned.
Yeah, I think that, everything in the book is, because I do on-the-ground research. I mean, you can Google it. That's one of the fun things fans tell me is, I mention a hotel or a castle or something, and they'll Google it, and boom, there it is. And they can actually, sometimes they have inside cameras, and you're like, oh, that's exactly where Pike Logan was running.
Brad, you got to come back to this show anytime in the future. You know the door is always going to be open for you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Good time.
You bet. Anytime we get together in Charleston, we got to go over there to John's Island or something, or go out to the Folly Beach to that lighthouse, because I'm going to tell you, that lighthouse is like a powerful engine of energy out there.
No, you got to go to Shim Creek. That's where Pike Logan's office is, and that's where all the bars are.
Oh, my God. You just shot back a bunch of memories for me, man. You're absolutely right about that. It's a date, dude. It's right there in Mount Pleasant.
Mount Pleasant.
That's also where Patriots Point is. How do you go to Patriots Point and not have flashbacks? My dad went with me, and we got inside, got on the ship, and it was time to go home. He could not deal with it. How do you deal with it?
Well, I don't actually. I mean, you're talking about the Yorktown, and it's a World War II aircraft carrier, so it really doesn't give me any flashbacks, although they do have a Vietnam system, too, and I was in Vietnam. I deal with it just like every other veteran, one day at a time.
Yep. Dude, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. You be brilliant today, okay, sir?
Thank you. Thank you for having me.